Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Casual Criminalist. As always, I'm your host Simon. What happens here, one of my writers, in this case Emma, thank you Emma, has written me a script, The Fiery Escape of Thabo Bester. I have to say, I don't know what order these episodes have come out in, but this is a relief, because the last episode I recorded, in fact I did it just yesterday, was called The Toy Box Killer, and then I recorded another episode the day before that was, I think it was like about the worst serial killer in American history. So it's quite nice that this guy's going to be escaping from prison, because honestly, I could use a break from people. You don't want to know what the toy box is. I mean, you probably do. You're probably going to watch that episode or listen to it, however this show's on YouTube as well as a podcast. But it is fucking grim. I promise you that, and I am glad that I have a little break from that today. So let's jump in. In the early hours of the 3rd of May, 2022, so recent, quiet voices reverberated along the dimly lit hallways of Broadway, the segregation unit of Mangaung Correctional Centre in Bloemfontein, South Africa. At around 2 o'clock, we were sleeping. Then we heard an explosion. After the explosion, we all woke up, even the other inmates. We could all smell the petrol, and we opened the windows while questioning what is going on. Everyone could smell the petrol, but we didn't know where it was coming from. Is it diesel or petrol? What's the one that smells really good? Although not everyone likes the smell. But whenever I'm at the petrol station, I'm feeling like, I can't remember which car it is. I've got a diesel car and a petrol car. And like one of them smells, I think it's diesel. I think diesel smells real good. And you're just like, I'm like, yes. And I know it's probably terrible and it probably gave me cancer. But yeah, I mean, let's hope not. Black smoke started billowing down the hallways, and the inmates covered their mouths and noses with blankets and clothing, while others scrambled to open their windows. The inmates started pressing the panic buttons in their cells while they shouted and cried for help, and the smell of burning flesh mixed in with the petrol fumes. Oh my god. Okay, never mind. I was like, oh. At least this isn't an episode where people get horribly murdered. No, they're just getting burned to death in a prison. Also, I didn't realize prisons had panic buttons. I was in the movies, it's like, oh, what happens in the cell? It's like you and some like skinhead Aryan dude called John. And yeah, he's just going to stab you in your sleep and there's nothing you can do about it. That's how I imagine prison.
Now stand back, I gotta practice my stabbing.
It's not like, oh yeah, just press the panic button, everything will be fine. Oh, yeah, but by that point, John has stabbed you like 700 times with a sharpened toothbrush. Between 20 and 40 minutes later, we heard the second explosion. The second explosion was worse than the first one. Back in the control room, a report came in from one of the wardens that there was smoke in the corridors of Broadway. The two control room operators checked the CCTV footage but couldn't see any signs of a fire, so they contacted Broadway's unit supervisor, who ordered the guard who had reported the fire to deal with an emergency elsewhere in the prison. At 4 a.m., the control room operators reported that they confirmed that a fire had broken out in cell 35 and finally set off the emergency alarm while making numerous calls to the 10111 emergency police number, which went unanswered. I'd never seen that as low as 999 or 911 or 112 or 158 here in Czech, where I live. Also 112, because that's all across Europe you can use. Fun facts with Simon. Also, why aren't the police picking up? When the prison calls you to say that there's a problem, that should be like a priority. I don't know, the prisoners could be murdering. They're prisoners. It's what they do. I mean, some of them. Maybe some of them are not murderers. By then, the fire had been extinguished and cell 35 was cordoned off. The walls on the right side of the cell were black with acrid-smelling soot. The mattress had been overturned and was now a burnt-out husk, and a charred body lay underneath it. At 4:26 a.m., a nurse arrived at cell 35, and we then overheard from the nurses that Thabo Bester is dead. Just before we continue with today's video, today I've got something exciting to share with you. You see this little device in my hand? This is not just a device. It's a secret weapon to understanding your body better and feeling amazing every day. It is Lumen. So, well, what is Lumen? Well, it's like having a metabolic coach right in your pocket. It measures your metabolism through your breath, giving you insight into whether you're burning fats or carbs. And why does this matter? Well, imagine your metabolism as an engine that powers your body. Optimal metabolic health means smoother weight management, better energy levels, and improved fitness. And that's where Lumen comes in, guiding you towards metabolic flexibility, the key to long-term health. With over 55 million metabolic measurements logged, Lumen stands as an authority in this field with their unparalleled expertise. Using Lumen is a breeze. You simply connect it to the app, you turn it on, you connect to the app, and that happens immediately, then you just click this button down here. Let's do, I just ate lunch, so we'll do an after eating. And we'll say that is lunch. Click next. I'll speed this up a little bit for you. What you do.
Deeply through your lumen. Hold your breath. Exhale in 3, 2, 1.
Analyzing. And just like that, it tells me that I'm burning mostly fat, 65% fat, 35% carbs, which makes sense because that's the sort of diet I'm on. Plus, you got your food log there so you can log it, and then it gives you a nutrition plan based on your metabolic measurements. So for me, it's enjoying non-starchy vegetables, which is what I've been doing. Plus, you can track your progress, get feedback, and it just makes all of those food decisions very easy. So to get your free metabolic health score, go to go.lumen.me/criminalist, or because that's a bit of a nightmare, click the link in the description below and you'll get $100 off Lumen. That's it, $100 off Lumen through the link below. And now back to today's episode. Who was Thabo Bester? Thabo Bester was born on the 13th of June 1986 in what is now known as the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto, Johannesburg. Soweto, not Soweto. Oh, I've always pronounced it Soweto. But apparently it's Soweto.
Soweto.
His mother, Maisi Mabaso, had later claimed that she'd been sexually assaulted 9 months earlier, and as such, she didn't know who Bester's father was. Macy never reported Bester's birth to the Department of Home Affairs, and as such, he was never added to the National Population Register and didn't have an ID number or a birth certificate. Isn't that going to be a bit of a problem when you need stuff as an adult? Like, as a kid, I'm sure you could get through life without having, an ID. But when you become an adult, you're like, yeah, I want to learn to drive a car. And they'll be like, okay, just, I suppose. I know, because I have a birth. I didn't see my birth certificate. I'd never seen my birth certificate until I got married. And then I was like, yo, Dad, you got my birth certificate somewhere? And he's like, yeah, probably. Let me have a look and I'll dig it out. And it's like some ancient, not ancient, I'm not that old, but it was like from 1987, this birth certificate, handwritten. I'm like, okay, thanks. Never seen it before. But I'd never needed it up to that point in my life. I don't know how it works. Like when I applied for a driver's license for the first time, they just send it to you. I'm obviously in the system because I'm not this dude. But I feel like not being in the system is going to cause problems in your life. The only record of his birth was a note that was made in the hospital's ledgers. In order to explain the discrepancy between their surnames, she'd later tell journalists from the independent newspaper Ground Up that Bester was her grandparents' surname. At the time, Macy was still living with her parents, Joanna and Abel Maboso, on a farm in Eichenhof just south of Johannesburg, and they would look after him once his mother returned to work. Macy would later tell local news network EWN that, quote, I raised him till he was 1 year. When he was 1 year, my mother said I must give her the child because she will look after the child while I was working. When Bester was 2, his sister Stompy was born, and Macy left her 2 children with their parents so that she could move closer to work. I'll go to visit, and I'm coming back. At the end of the day, my mother, she shouted at me every day. She pushed me away. When she pushed me away, I said, no, I'll stay at my place. I won't go there again. The quote ends. Difficult to read quote, by the way. At one point, Macy went back to collect her 2 children so that they could live with her, but she was now living in a tin shack in a black township, and Bester insisted on moving back in with his grandparents because he didn't want to live in a simple 2-room shack in a township. Yeah, that's not unreasonable. How old was he? However old you are, it's like your grandparents have raised you since you're 1, so you're going to be much closer to them. And then someone arrives and is like, yo, you got to come live in a shack with me. I'll be like, bruh, I just want to stay with my grandparents. Thank you very much. I like the house more and I like them more. You left me when I was 1, mother. Bester would later tell forensic and investigative psychologist Dr. Gerard Labuscani, Emma even spelled that for me phonetically and it's still hard, that life with his grandparents wasn't ideal since he grew up poor and claimed his grandparents were alcoholics. Oh, okay. It sounded quite nice compared to, but he didn't want to go to the tin shack. They worked as farm labourers, which meant that his grandfather would work the fields or help to tend to the cows, and his grandmother kept house for the family. Bester would play with the other farm workers' children, and when they got into trouble, his grandfather, Abel, would beat him as punishment. This was the 90s, though. I was South Africa, which I assume just generally got rid of corporal punishment later. Like my dad's from Zimbabwe, and he was like, yeah, when I was a kid, they used to beat me. And my mum, who's not, it's like, what? What are you talking about? When you were a kid, it's like my grandparents got beaten. And it's like, yeah, they were just like a little bit slower on getting rid of. And if I remember right, my dad said like the prefects at his school could beat him. And then when he became a prefect, it was the year that they took away the ability for the prefects to beat the kids like with a whip. And I don't think he was disappointed, but he'd be like, God damn, he used to get whipped so hard. Not much else is known about Bester's early life, and what we do know was pieced together in the last year. Oh yeah, because this is all super recent. According to Nelleen Lowe, they'd owned a luxury eco-lodge just south of Johannesburg in 1990, and when Bester was 4 years old, he came and knocked on their door asking for food. The Lowe family took pity on the small boy and gave him food and clothes. This became a habit of his, and they took pity on the small, kind, soft-spoken but poor and neglected boy. He played with their children, and they gave him free rein inside their home, not knowing he was stealing whatever amounts of loose change he could get his hands on. But then Bester's grandfather allegedly discovered a pile of cash that Bester had been hoarding, and Bester told him that Mrs. Lowe had given it to him. According to Mrs. Lowe, there was a knock on the back door, and there stood a grandfather and this small boy. The old man asked if I had given money to the child. I said no. An old childhood friend of Bester's would later tell News 24 that they'd known Bester for most of his childhood and had always thought that he was a kind, friendly boy. To quote, I'll never forget when he got into the car for the first time. I felt so much for him. I was privileged, and I saw that his parents were torn. We bought him some groceries and dropped him off at his granny's house. They were so poor that they lived in the deep south of Johannesburg. It always felt like he was a brother to me, but it seems, even as a kid, he was deceiving people. He was polite and the nicest person. It seemed to be his modus operandi, and it fooled even my mother and father. I felt he was the brother I never had. After the end of apartheid in 1994, children of all races were encouraged to attend school together to help with social integration. According to Steve Mabona, the Gauteng Department of Education spokesperson, Joanna and Abel first sent the 11-year-old Bester to attend a predominantly white Afrikaans-speaking school in 1997. Because he didn't have a birth certificate or even certified documents that confirmed that his grandparents were his legal guardians, the school had to jump through multiple hoops to get him registered as a pupil. Mr. Mabona would later tell local news channel ENCA that, quote, we cannot deny the education of a child because he lacked documentation. We have a constitutional obligation to provide education to all our children. Okay, so yeah, not having documents did prove to be a hassle, but not an insurmountable one. According to the book The Thabo Bester Story by journalists Mauricia Damons and Daniel Stein, Bester was 3 years older than the other kids in his class and didn't do well in school, but he excelled at rugby and athletics and was well liked by the teachers and other students. In 1999, Bester befriended a boy named Zunaid Koch. Zunaid was 2 years younger than Bester, and Bester would spend most of his time with Zunaid's family, possibly feeling that it was a safe haven for him. According to Zunaid's mother, Shanaz, Bester would come home with Zunaid after school, spend the afternoon at their house, and then would go home. During school holidays, Bester was a constant fixture in their home, and at one point, Shanaz must have asked him what his home life was like because, quote, he always used to talk about his grandmother. He loved his grandmother. I asked him about his mum, and he told me no, he doesn't have a relationship with his mother. His father had passed on. Eventually, Zunaid's parents became Bester's unofficial guardians. They bought him clothes and paid for his school trips and took him to church, and Shanaz would later tell ENCA that, quote, Bester was a lovely child. He was always laughing. He was very kind, not abusive, not bullying any of the other children. He was never in any trouble that we could say we had to go to the school. In May 2002, Bester was 15 when his grandmother Joanna had a stroke. According to Macy, I go home. Thabo's not there. My mother's sick, I bring her here. With her help, we take her to the hospital. After she died, then we buried her. When we finished burying her, Thabo's not there. We were looking for Thabo. We couldn't find him. Before she passed away, Joanna had told Macy that Thabo had been visiting with a friend and would return home soon. This friend was Zunaid, but it sounds like Bester never returned home once his grandmother had passed away. The 16-year-old Bester dropped out of school in September 2002, his final year of primary school. Unbeknownst to, I was like, primary school? But I guess primary school ends at 16 in South Africa. Unbeknownst to Zunaid's family, Bester was now living in a shack in a local township, along with a group of men that had taken him in. He would later claim that they'd abused him sexually in return for their protection, and that he did what he had to do to survive. This also meant that he regularly mixed with the criminal underbelly in the township, and they would teach him the skills he needed to survive. According to Bester, I resorted to crime to support myself. It is either you die or you make a plan. Zunaid was now attending Hyde Park High School, but he was still friends with Bester, who'd drop in every now and then to visit his best friend. According to Shanaz, my phone went missing in the house one day. We were all looking for it, and he helped us look for the phone, and we couldn't find the phone. And the next day, he left early, and he was gone. When Bester next visited their house, he was flush with cash, and Shanice asked Zunaid whether he thought that Bester might have stolen her phone. Zunaid told his mum that the phone wasn't even worth the amount of money Bester had in his possession, so she dropped the issue. Then money started disappearing around the house. Bester would disappear for days on end, only to be dropped off by men in fancy cars, and he would take Zunaid on shopping trips, after which the two of them would return home dressed in brand-name clothes and wearing golden chains around their necks. Bester is up to crimes. That sort of money, at that age, in this situation, it's crimes. Maybe drugs. In 2004, the 18-year-old Bester was already a practiced con man. Oh, okay, con man then. It's better than drugs, I suppose. Con man's kind of like glamorous compared to like drugs, which is just, not glamorous. He had stolen Zunaid's high school blazer and would wander around Hyde Park, an upmarket suburb in Johannesburg, wearing a Hyde Park high school uniform. Zunaid's blazer was lined with badges, and it enabled Bester to pretend that he was a top academic student good at sports and that he was a head boy, and he used this persona to con caring, well-meaning suburban mums out of thousands of rand. In the book The Thabo Bester Story, one of these mums, Karen van der Merwe, explained that she met Bester one morning in September 2004. He'd been hitchhiking in his stolen school uniform, and when she asked if he needed help, he told her that he didn't have money for a bus fare and was now late for school. She offered to give him a lift, and on the way, Bester told her that his grandmother was in hospital and that he now had to take care of himself. He also told her about an athletics championship that was taking place in Durban, and he couldn't afford to go. Just like the Lowe family, Karen took pity on the well-spoken, friendly young man who spoke fluent Afrikaans and offered to help him out. She booked a plane ticket for him in a room in a hotel, gave him spending money, and promised to drop him off at the airport. Wow. You're a good person. On their way to the airport a few days later, Karen was listening to Bester ramble on about his life, and the red flags started popping up. Quote, "I was driving into the airport when I noticed 2 holes in his earlobe. By then he had told me a lot of things that didn't ring true, and I suddenly realized that this was not the decent child of a devout Christian granny." Just in case her statement regarding the earrings confuses some people, back in 2004, the Afrikaans community in South Africa was still very conservative, like Mormon-level conservative. The idea that a well-brought-up Christian schoolboy would have multiple piercings in his ears, or, heaven forbid, a tattoo, was unheard of. It's because of their strict conservative and hypocritical upbringing that in the early 2000s, Afrikaans teenagers rebelled and started listening to rock bands like Die Antwoord and Fuck Off Polizika, aka Fuck Off Police Car. Anyway, it's like if you go too hard in one direction, your kids are going to rebel in the other. Anyway, once Karen realized that Bester wasn't who he pretended to be, she called a friend of hers, Belinda Watts, for advice. Belinda Watts' husband was the renowned investigative journalist Derek Watts, one of the late presenters of Carte Blanche, and Belinda told Karen that the boy in her car was a known con artist. Belinda told Karen to keep up the pretense that she was taking Bester to the airport, and then Belinda would have the police meet him at the airport. Soon after they arrived, Karen's car was surrounded by police, and the 18-year-old Bester was arrested. That seems like quite heavy. He's just conning her out of a little money. It's not good, but it's not like, do we need to surround her car with police? Can't we just go to his house later and arrest him? He's not a violent criminal, he's just a con man. Unfortunately, Karen decided not to lay any charges against him, and Bester was let go. A week later, he scammed another woman out of 200 rand and stole a third woman's purse. The two of them reported him to the police, and Bester was arrested yet again. Bester the con man. Bester was still wearing Zunaid's blazer when he was arrested, and Zunaid's father went to collect it from the juvenile detention center where Bester was being held. According to Shanaz, "My husband told Bester, 'I'm very upset and angry with you. Please stay away and don't come to my house again.'" When Bester was released from the juvenile detention center 6 months later, he called his mother to come and pick him up. It was the first time she'd heard from him in over 7 years, and Macy would later tell the news network EWN, "That day was the last day I saw Thabo." After his release, Bester worked hard on his craft. He initially lived on the streets of Johannesburg and became a petty thief. He also claimed that he used to sell fake concert tickets to university students in Pretoria, that he once rented out a pub in Soweto for a fake event, and charged the 800 attendees an extortionate entrance fee before fleeing the chaos. And he ran various fraudulent modeling and promotional agencies all over the country. Wow, he stepped up his game. Conning 800 people, that's quite impressive. I don't like it. It's just there's something fascinating about con people, isn't there? Like, I'm fascinated by this. I don't know why. Why are people so fascinated by con men? Because I feel it's not just me. There's like all sorts of books about this stuff. I find it very interesting. Later he'd go by the alias Tom Kelly and would contact beautiful women via Facebook. The charming Tom would tell them that they were the next best thing and invited them to hotel rooms and restaurants to attend glamorous photo shoots, during which he would rob them blind. According to the book The Thabo Bester Story, an advertisement for Africa's Next Top Model did the rounds in newspapers in March 2009. According to the ad, America's Next Top Model was looking for Southern Africa's next big star, and auditions would be held at the Sandton Convention Center. It cost 400 rand, $43 to enter, and the winner was set to win $100,000 or 731,000 rands in cash. Cash money, baby. It was based on a real campaign called West Africa's Next Top Model that had been launched in 2008 and even used the same poster design to make it seem more legitimate. ETV, a South African television station that had permission to broadcast America's Next Top Model, issued a statement to the media to warn all models and modeling agencies that the competition was a scam. But hundreds of women had already paid their entrance fee to the organizer, Tom Kelly, and they reported him to the police, resulting in Bester's arrest. Unfortunately, he was able to post bail and was released shortly after. A week after his release, Bester tried to convince Anton Taylor, a representative from the University of Cape Town Student Council, to allow him to organize a photo shoot on the campus. Bester claimed to be the owner of an American television network called Black Entertainment Television, as well as the owner of a local network called Bad Schoolboy. But when Taylor met Bester, he grew suspicious when Mr. Big Businessman wasn't able to answer simple questions about his company or planned photo shoots. That doesn't sound like a very well-prepared con man. Also, how old is he at this point? It's like, yes, I own an American television network, Black Entertainment Television, and one locally as well. It's like, how old are you? It's like, no, you don't. Then Bester claimed that he'd lost his bank card and asked if Taylor could spot him some money to pay for his accommodation that night, and the spell broke. Taylor reported Bester to the police, and just like that, Bester was back in prison. He was found guilty on 2 charges of fraud and spent some more time in prison, though no one seems to be sure exactly how long his sentence was. In the last year, multiple people have come forward to claim that they'd once been scammed by Bester, but we don't have any proof of these alleged crimes. However, we do know that shortly after his 25th birthday, Bester went from petty thief and scam artist to serial sexual assaulter. Oh no! I was like, oh, this episode's going to be just a nice one about a con man and a thief. And now he has to do some sex crimes. Why? In 2011, Bester had placed several advertisements in local magazines, calling on models to audition for a role as an MTV presenter, but he would also contact potential victims through Facebook. A 24-year-old model agreed to meet him at a City Lodge hotel in Durban on the 19th of August 2011 and was immediately charmed by him. He had been richly dressed when he met her in the hotel's foyer and graciously escorted her up to one of the bedrooms. Later, he would end up sexually assaulting her by knife point and demanding that she tell him the PIN codes for her bank cards. The model fought back, and Bester stabbed her in the stomach and tried to strangle her. Oh no, what? After she passed out, Bester left her for dead, taking her cell phone and bank cards with him, and then went on a shopping spree at a nearby mall. Bester, wait. What are you doing? You're obviously going to go to prison for this. She knows who you are, basically. You're spending on the cards. There's going to be cameras. When is this, 2011? Come on. This is very bad criming. Luckily, the model survived the attack and was able to call for help. A week later, he'd attack a 26-year-old model in exactly the same way. She, too, survived the attack, and both women reported their attacks to the police. Shortly after, the police launched a manhunt for Bester and called him the Facebook R-wordist. Thank you for making it weird, YouTube. Yes, this early in the video, how are we in 23 minutes? Maybe we're safe using the R-word, but yeah, YouTube doesn't like that. My videos get turned to yellow on YouTube, which means they don't really make any money, so I gotta be careful. At the time, Bester was dating the 26-year-old Nomfundo Taihulu. Nomfundo worked as a car salesperson at a BMW dealership in Sandton, Johannesburg, and she met Bester shortly after he was released from prison in early 2011. Bester bought a new BMW 1 Series from her and used his charm, telling her she would be perfect for a new TV show he was planning. The two of them dated for 8 months, and on the 19th of September 2011, Bester and Nomfundo flew down to Cape Town for a romantic holiday. They spent 2 nights at a luxury hotel, then moved to a bed and breakfast on Sunset Beach. According to Bester, the two of them argued on their last night together because Nomfundo had realized that Bester was still seeing other women. At around 2 a.m. the next morning, Bester decided that it would be best if he cut Nomfundo loose, so he attacked her and threatened her with a knife, demanding that she should hand over her laptop and cell phone. Oh my. That's a unique way to break up with someone. Nomfundo fought back, and in the ensuing struggle, Bester managed to stab her in the chest. He tied her up, demanded her laptop's password, and watched as she slowly bled out. He took a shower, got dressed, packed his bags, and left the room at 7 a.m. He told the owners that she was still asleep and that he needed a lift to town. That afternoon, Bester got on a plane and flew back to Durban. Nomfundo's body was only discovered at 9 p.m. that night. Okay, so he became a murderer. So much for my dream of it's it's about con men. Oh no, he does sexual crimes. Oh no, he's a murderer. The Facebook R-wordist. At the time of Nomfundo's murder, the KwaZulu-Natal police were still looking for Bester. The media reported that he was wanted for attempted murder, sexual assault and robbery, and the police had a list of all 13 of the aliases he used, with News 24 reporting that one of the aliases he used was Thomas Bester. He had multiple Facebook accounts, and even used them to taunt the police, posting the following status updates on one of his profiles. "Catch me if you can. Why are people still bothering me?" After he murdered Nomfundo, Bester deleted all of his Facebook profiles before he went into hiding, and then he told everyone to call him Mr. Boyson, which was a subtle taunt since he'd learned that Detective Boyson was the one who was investigating his crimes. On the 6th of October 2011, Bester hijacked a car in Alberton, a suburb south of Johannesburg. A police chase ensued, and Bester crashed the car, resulting in his arrest. He was taken to the police station, and there Bester mockingly told the officers on duty who he was, explaining that Detective Boyson from KwaZulu-Natal was looking for him. Detective Boyson then took Bester back to Durban, where he appeared in court a week later after being charged with 2 counts of sexual assault and 2 counts of robbery. During the trial, Bester pled guilty to all charges, but during his mitigation hearing, he reportedly told the court that he was a father to 3 daughters, and that as a father, he would never sexually assault anyone. After all, wait, didn't he just say he pled guilty? What are you doing? Do you not have a lawyer telling you what to do? After all, he was a victim of sexual assault himself. He claimed that he'd once been held as an older man's plaything for more than a week and had frequently been molested while hitchhiking. He had been molested both as a child and a teenager, and had been sexually attacked while he was in prison for fraud, resulting in him needing an operation done on his behind. Bester reportedly broke out in tears during the hearing and told the court that, quote, "I know I have done terrible things. This is not truly who I am. I want the opportunity to make things right." Bester told the court that the reason why he decided to plead guilty to all charges was to save his victims' families the pain of hearing what he'd done to their daughters. But despite his claims of abuse, Magistrate Sharon Marks told Bester that, quote, "You may regret your conduct, but that does not make you remorseful. You have not explained what motivated you to commit these crimes." Magistrate Marks then sentenced Bester to spend 15 years in prison for each sexual assault, as well as another 10 for each charge of armed robbery, which was a total of 50 years. That is a long time. That is about what he deserves, isn't it? However, he'd already been implicated in the murder of Nomfundo Taihulu, and on the 3rd of November 2011, just 3 weeks after he'd last been in court, Bester appeared in court in Cape Town and was charged with 1 count of murder. Dr. Thabo Skachny would be asked to interview Bester before his trial, and during their discussion, he tried to get an idea of the type of person Bester is. Dr. Thabo Skachny would later tell journalists Marcia Damons and Daniel Stein from Ground Up that Bester displayed signs of a personality disorder, that he was a narcissist, had a complete disregard for the consequences of his actions, and had been confident that he wouldn't be caught, and needed to feel in control. I don't know why I feel confident that he wouldn't be caught. He seems like a bad criminal. Not as in he's doing bad things, which he obviously is, but he's also pretty shit doing those bad things. In terms of evidence and witnesses and stuff like this. It's just he's not obeying those crime rules. A recording of their discussion went public in April 2023, and during their conversation, an animated Bester discusses his crimes, claiming that he hadn't even known that he'd sexually assaulted those women until the police started looking for him. The sexual assaults happened in a way that I didn't know what I was doing was sexual assault until I left the premises. If I knew I was doing sexual assault, I could have covered myself up using certain methods so that my fingerprints were not there. So it only became known to me that I did sexual assault when I left. Bro, you sexually attacked someone at knife point. What do you think sexual assault is? He also told Dr. Labuskachny that he felt he didn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison for Nomfundo's murder. According to Bester, he'd had feelings for her. Initially, she was just another target, but after they spent 2 days together, he'd started to feel something for her, and he hadn't meant to kill her. "Didn't you stab and strangle her? And then left her to die?" To quote him, "I feel that I'm not somebody that you should worry about leaving in a room with me. that I'd sexually assault her. The murder, I feel, was just a pure, we fight over a knife, somebody gets stabbed in the process. And it was not my intention to never kill anyone. My intentions with her were straightforward. I liked her. Things got twisted whenever they got twisted, and we had a fight. The knife got out of hand. She got stabbed. I tried to stop it. If I went to the cops and said we had a fight and she got stabbed in the process, no one was going to believe me. The first thing to do, obviously, was wake up the owners of the B&B, let them come and call the cops and get an ambulance there. But I thought if I do that, that's like me saying, okay, I did the murder. That is my reason for running at that point. But not taking this away, I also feel I am responsible for her death. Yeah, you are. You stabbed her. Because if I did not bring the knife, she would not be dead. If I did not ask her to come, she wouldn't be dead. I'm responsible for her death. That is 100% certain. I'm not responsible for killing her. I did not kill her. I'm sure if I wanted to kill her, I'm not a stupid person. I could have done it in a way that the cops would not even know that it was me. At the end of the interview, Bester asked Dr. Labiskachny if he would be able to convince the court that Bester's abusive past was a mitigating circumstance, which might result in Bester receiving a lesser sentence for Nomfundo's murder. But Dr. Labiskachny told Bester that it all depended on the plea deal that the lawyers would be able to draw up for him, and that his so-called abusive childhood wasn't an excuse to sexually assault others. Yes, because as we bring up many times in the Casual Criminalist, plenty of people have shitty backgrounds, many of them where they're sexually abused, and they don't all turn out to be fucking murderers, do they? Following their discussion, Bester decided to plead guilty to Nomfundo's murder, and on the 16th of August 2012, Judge Judy Cloet sentenced him to life imprisonment. During her judgment, she said, "The fact of the matter is that in your own version, this was nothing other than a sequence of brutal and callous acts which deprived this young woman of her life. It also deprived her loved ones of her presence in their lives. In these circumstances, the community at large will rightly expect this court sentence to reflect the seriousness with which crimes of this nature are regarded. No lesser sentence would be appropriate." Mangaung Correctional Center. If Thabo Bester's story had ended when he first arrived at Mangaung Correctional Center, or MCC as it's known, today's episode would only be 30 minutes long, but it doesn't end there. And according to Dr. Labiskachny, when I got involved in this case, it was actually not a particularly interesting case. He was a guy who had sexually assaulted 2 people and killed someone. We saw countless cases like that. He was not an interesting person at all. He becomes interesting because he escaped the way that he did. Ooh, he escapes prison. Wait, in the beginning, that was his death in prison. So is he escaping prison, then going back in? At the time of writing, MCC is owned by a company called Bloemfontein Correctional Contracts, or BCC. BCC consists of 5 separate shareholders who all have a 20% stake in the prison. They're Old Mutual, a Pan-Africa insurance company, 3 black empowerment companies, and the British security firm G4S. Of course, because G4S somehow have their hands in everything. They're like that real-life umbrella corporation from those Resident Evil things. They just seem to do everything and have a massive private army. I think that it's like Their like private army is massive. Or like their private security force or whatever it is. G4S is scary. In 2000, BCC was awarded a 25-year-long contract with the Department of Corrections, and it has been speculated that this is mostly because the numerous political figures who are all shareholders in these black empowerment companies would greatly benefit if BCC won the contract. That sounds mega corrupt, doesn't it? The contract stipulated the BCC had to build and operate a state-of-the-art prison and then hand it over to the department once the contract expired in 2026. It was to serve as a trial run for privatizing the prison system, and in return, BCC would receive a one-off amount of 300 million rand, which would be used to build the prison. Once the prison started operating, they'd receive a monthly payment, which would total about 1.5 billion rand over the course of the next 25 years. However, in April 2023, it was reported that by February 2023, the department had already paid BCC an amount of 1.7 billion rand and was expected to pay another 2 billion rand before the contract expired in 2026. Oh my lord. That went over budget, didn't it? The prison has been operational since 2001 and can hold up to 3,000 prisoners. G4S is charged with the overall management of the prison, but they employ several contractors who are responsible for various aspects of the prison's daily management. G4S trains the wardens and security personnel. A company called Integriton Integrated Solutions manages the surveillance and security systems. Another company provides medical care, and another provides food to the inmates. Mangaung is considered to be a prime example of what a modern prison can be, and G4S proudly displays its name outside the prison walls. But In 2008, the University of Witwatersrand published the Wits Justice Project and reported that there had been over 5,000 allegations of abuse in the prison since it started operations, including the habitual torture of inmates, forced injections of antipsychotic drugs, and overall treatment that was considered inhumane in terms of the Nelson Mandela rules, which are the UN standard for how prisoners should be treated. Oh my lord. Like 5,000 allegations of abuse? Habitual torture? It's a fucking Guantanamo Bay or some shit. Multiple investigations were launched. A documentary called Prison for Profit took a deeper look at how MCC treated its inmates, and in 2013, the Department of Corrections, or DCS, took control of MCC for 3 months after the inmates managed to take a female warden hostage while the majority of the wardens were on strike. The department handed control of MCC back to G4S after 10 months, but in return, they wanted to be reimbursed for the 100 million rand that they'd paid G4S during this time. That court case is still ongoing. According to several whistleblowers, some of the wardens at MCC are not only particularly cruel, but they're also corrupt to the core. They deal drugs like weed, heroin, and crystal meth, or tick, as it's known here. And according to one witness, they'd confiscate a cell phone in one cell and sell it to a prisoner in the next one. Corruption is fucked up. Stop this. Because of the rampant corruption that is present in the prison, most of the inmates at MCC own brand new cell phones and regularly post videos of themselves on social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, showing off their high-flying lifestyles and 5-star amenities. Really? This is a modern prison? It sounds like those prisons from Prison Break, when they go to Mexico. Some of these witnesses claim that the prison is run by several gangs, and that if you have the money, you can quite literally get away with murder at MCC. One inmate would tell Grounds Up that if you are a gangster, you are king. You are respected by the management and security, and almost everyone is scared of you, unlike if you're not a gangster. Shortly after arriving at MCC, Bester befriended members of the Bulgarian mafia and other fraudsters who were serving time at the prison and quickly learned the lay of the land. What's a Bulgarian mafia doing in prison in South Africa? You got far afield, Bulgarian mafia. I didn't even know Bulgarian mafia was a thing. One of the wardens would later tell Grounds Up that, quote, Thabo Bester was always hustling, always smuggling. Maroy Mpau, a former G4S employee, told Carte Blanche that during his time working at the prison, the wardens were told not to interact with the notorious conman, but despite this, quote, Thabo Bester was running the facility. One of the inmates would explain that, when I met him, I gave him the name El Chapo. He made an army for himself for protection. He paid people money, so no one would know what he was up to. Bester soon learned which wardens to target, and he started winning their favor by bribing them into performing small favors for him. Quoting, he'd come out of his cell and just look at you. He'd make a note on Monday. What are you eating? And on the 25th, when you get your salary, what's your behavior? Are you smoking? What are you smoking? If you're smoking this type of cigarette, he'd know you're probably broke. He asked for a pack of cigarettes here and a can of Coke there, and it would eventually escalate to the point that he was wearing his own brand name clothes and slept on a comfortable mattress. He wore expensive watches, had multiple cell phones, a Bluetooth speaker, a laptop, had access to the internet, and even recorded himself having solo dance parties in his cell. He's got a laptop and internet? Like, what the f***? Sort that shit out. Do they even have plugs in prison cells? How's he charging it? Initially, he used his internet access to try and convince the outside world that he'd been set up and that he wasn't guilty of the crimes he'd been charged with. He set up multiple profiles on Twitter using the aliases Tom Motshipa and TK Nunkwana, and would allegedly contact media houses offering the journalists who emailed him back incriminating evidence on corrupt government officials in exchange for money. When that didn't work, he returned to his old modus operandi and reached out to women via social media. He introduced himself as either a US-based businessman named TK Nunkwana or a local businessman named Tom Motshipa, and would offer them opportunities to grow their business and their wealth. Bester also started several companies while in prison, the most notable of which is 21st Country Fox Group Holdings, JP Morgan Investment Group, and Vibes Africa. He personally headhunted various people in the media industry, offering them extraordinary amounts of money to work for him. God damn. It's just this dude on the internet in prison, and he's like hiring people and starting a media company. People fell for his scams, and at one point he employed over 20 people who worked out of a high-end office building in Santon. What the f*** is going on? They all thought their boss, Tom Motshipa, was based in New York, explaining why he was only available to conduct virtual meetings at night. They all worked on ideas for multiple television programs that would never air, held auditions for TV shows that would never be produced, and promoted events that would allegedly be attended by A-list celebrities. Yeah, but where's the money coming from? I understand how the money's being spent, but how's it coming in? On the 13th of June 2018, one of his companies hosted an expensive launch party at the Hilton Hotel in Santon, during which Bester called in wearing a luxurious white suit and designer watch and had the crowd sing him happy birthday. In the book, The Thabo Bester Story, journalists Mauricia Damas and Daniel Stein explain all his known schemes in detail for 4 chapters. So if you're interested in going, what the f*** and having your mind blown over and over, I suggest you check it out. I desperately want to read this book now. I find this sort of stuff, as I said, fascinating. For now, there's something else we need to introduce you to before we continue our story. And I'm sorry, Simon, but the pronunciation of some of the various names is going to become increasingly difficult from here on out. I was already difficult! Dr. Nandi. Nandipa Magudumana was born on the 4th of September 1988 in Bazana in the Transkei, which at the time was known as the homeland of the Xhosa people, which is similar to the Indian reservations that were established all over the US in the 19th century. At first, her family lived in a modest 2-room hut or rondeville, but later they'd expand the house, adding on several rooms. When Nandipa was 5 years old, the apartheid regime was coming to an end and her family bought a house in the previously whites-only coastal town of Port Edward. According to her brother, quote, "We were among the first black people in Port Edward to own a house, so you can imagine the transition. It was the end of apartheid and the tensions were high." It was fascinating. I was 8 years old. We could walk to the ocean because it was 100 meters from our house. So as a kid coming from a deeply rural area and suddenly you've got white neighbors and the beach right there, it was mind-boggling and amazing. We had to adapt well because we weren't used to this new life and how to carry ourselves. The difference now was that it was a suburban area. The house was huge and there was indoor plumbing, which we never had in Bazana. We could hear the ocean from our bedrooms. For us as kids, we'd never experienced stuff like that. Nandipa's father, Zoilila Sekolini, became involved in the transitional government after the fall of apartheid in 1994 and would later become the first black deputy mayor of Port Edward. Their mother ran night school. Isn't it fucking crazy that it wasn't until 1994? I know it's like, it shouldn't shock me because it's like, oh, obviously I know about this. I was 7 and it's like apartheid was just coming to an end. Jesus Christ, South Africa, get your shit together. Their mother ran night schools in the area and is described by her children as being a workaholic who barely had any time for them. Nandipa is described as being an angel when she was growing up. She was a straight-A student, a prefect, had an interest in swimming, gymnastics, ballet, and modeling. She would later explain that she had decided she wanted to be a doctor when she was 6 years old, and in the new South Africa, this was entirely possible. Nandipa studied for a Bachelor of Health Science degree at Wits University in Johannesburg and then went on to study medicine, becoming a qualified doctor in 2013. That December, the beautiful and hard-working 25-year-old Nandipa married a 43-year-old pediatrician who was known to his friends as Dr. Mac, and they would go on to live a life of luxury. Well, that's nice. Dr. Mac was a socialite, and his beautiful wife fit neatly in with his glamorous lifestyle. They lived in a 6-bedroom mansion where they regularly hosted their celebrity friends, and some of their friends would later explain that when you go to his house, you don't want to leave. Wow, this sounds all really nice. What sort of horrible thing is going to happen to ruin this for me? Nandipa wasn't just a pretty face, and she had some ambitions of her own. Yeah, she's a doctor. It's already pretty good. She worked in various hospitals for 4 years before she opened her own skincare and aesthetics clinic, Optimum Medical Aesthetic Solutions, in 2017. Her clients were the creme de la creme of Santon's high society, and she would affectionately become known as Dr. Nandi. She appeared on local TV and radio shows and soon became Instagram famous, making the Mail and Guardian's list of top 200 young South Africans and 50 powerful women. In 2018, Glamour magazine featured her in a full-page article saying, "Yes, she slays the fashion game, but don't get it twisted. She ain't here to just be a face or to be a blessee. She is a powerhouse medical practitioner and businesswoman." Even during the height of lockdown, Nandipa's clinic continued to flourish, and in June 2020, she bought a brand new Porsche Cayenne for 2.5 million rand, followed by a Range Rover worth 4 million rand just 2 months later, explaining in a Facebook post that she was so blessed and that hard work pays. Seems a bit she bought just 2 months later. Was the Porsche Cayenne, which is also an SUV, not enough? She went on expensive holidays, wore expensive clothes, and continued to slay like a queen. On the surface, Nandipa had it all: a rich husband, 2 beautiful daughters, and a thriving business. But it would come to light later that she'd already been involved with Bester since 2006. What? Why? Your life seems awesome. Multiple people, including Nandipa herself, would later claim that she'd met Bester while she was studying at WITS. She was 18 at the time and allegedly worked as a promo girl for a modeling and promotional agency that Bester was running on campus. It's possible that Bester became aware of her success while in prison and re-established contact with her sometime after her marriage to Dr. Mack. Why would you continue? If I was in this situation, I'd be like, no. Like, I was 18 and stupid, and now you've been in prison, and I'm a famous doctor. Like, hard pass on meeting up for coffee, all right? In 2016, she registered Vibes Africa Incorporation International, one of Bester's fake companies, and listed herself and Bester as directors. What are you doing? Prison records show that she first met him in prison on the 13th of January 2018, and she would visit him a total of 24 times over the next 3 years. She would later claim that they became engaged in 2020. Why are you doing this? I know he's like a con man, so he's like very charming, I'm sure, and all of this stuff, but this is objectively a terrible idea. During this time, Nandipa had quietly separated from the 50-year-old Dr. Mack, and she moved into a luxurious mansion in Hyde Park, Bester's old stomping grounds, in 2021. She ran 2 companies on behalf of Bester, Aram Holdings, a construction company, and Doctors Network Legacy, which ran events for medical professionals. Using these companies as fronts, the 2 of them were able to defraud Nandipa's friends and colleagues out of an estimated 15 million rands, or about $2.7 million. Wait, I'm just doing the maths on that. She bought a Range Rover for 4 million rand, which is basically a third of 15 million, or 2.7. A Range Rover doesn't cost $900,000. No, it's. I used to drive a Range Rover, and it wasn't like a big and fancy one or whatever, but it definitely didn't cost me $900,000. That's insane. Her new carefree life wasn't all sunshine and roses though, and soon the cracks started to show. Nandipa didn't pay her annual licensing fees to the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, and in April 2021 her medical license was suspended. She wasn't able to keep up the monthly payments on her Porsche and tried to get out of paying for it by driving over the border into Zimbabwe and just abandoning the car there, claiming that it had been stolen. She also introduced Bester to her family over video calls and told them that he was TK, her business partner and mentor. It didn't take long for her brother to figure out that TK was the infamous Thabo Bester, and he ended up blackmailing his sister for 100,000 rand, or $5,360. I'm sorry, is my maths? I don't know why I do public maths. It's a terrible idea. I'm just realizing I probably added an extra 0 to the price of that Range Rover, which makes it 90,000 American dollars, which makes a lot more sense. Siri, what's 15 million South African rand in American dollars? Oh, Siri's fucking useless. Nandipa didn't pay up, and when her brother started telling everyone who'd listened that she was involved with the infamous Facebook R-wordist, Nandipa took him to court for posting defamatory statements about her on social media, and her brother was forced to erase all records of his so-called unfounded allegations. Between April 2021 and February 2023, Nandipa seemingly carried on as usual as she kept posting inspirational posts to both Twitter and Instagram. She went shopping with her daughters, drove around in luxury cars, went on expensive holidays, and continued treating her patients despite no longer having a valid medical license. She also managed the various companies she had established, defrauded more people out of millions of rands, racked up thousands of rands in debt because, despite robbing people of millions, she somehow could no longer afford to pay her rent, disappeared for weeks on ends, and in January 2023 she explained to her clients that she was fully booked and would reopen her clinic again soon. How did your life become such a giant mess so suddenly? This is so crazy. Everything was going so well. That is until a small newspaper broke the story that Thabo Bester had escaped from prison and that Dr. Nandi had helped him do it. Oh, The Great Escape. Bester's plan to escape from prison wasn't as simple as hiring a helicopter, carving a revolver out of soap, or climbing through a window while a prison guard patiently waited for him to take a piss, and yet the media would later refer to it as his prison walkout. First, Bester and Nandipa recruited a prison warden that Bester was friendly with, the unit supervisor at Broadway, Senoha Matsuhara. Allegedly, Nandipa offered to pay Matsuhara 7 million rand, or $372,000, in exchange for helping Bester escape from prison. He then recruited Taboho Lipolo, a CCTV technician who worked for Integratron, and they offered him 2.5 million rand for his part in the escape. Some of their other accomplices would be bribed with smaller amounts, and others received no money at all. The first attempt was supposed to take place between the 15th and the 18th of April 2022. A few days before, Lipolo tested the security system by manually disabling the CCTV recording devices, or DVRs, for a few hours. Because CCTV cameras were still on and working, no one raised an alarm. However, to cover his tracks, Lipolo reported that there'd been a power outage and that as a result, they'd lost several hours' worth of footage. Nandipa travelled down to Bloemfontein on the 13th of April 2022, and while she was in town, she took a trip to Bloemfontein Government Mortuary. There, she identified one of the unclaimed bodies as belonging to her father. The man had already been dead for 6 months and had been killed in a hit-and-run incident on the 9th of October 2021. Nandipa signed all the necessary documents and requested that her father's body be taken to a local funeral home before they held a small funeral service for him. The service was held under the cover of darkness, and when the coffin was lowered into the ground, it had to be weighed down with old cooked meat. Oh wow, I see what's going on. She's stolen the body, hasn't she? Meanwhile, Bester had submitted an isolation request on the 15th of April, claiming that he'd been threatened by the 26 Numbers gang and that he wanted to be placed in the segregation unit for his own safety. He couldn't be moved to Broadway before the DCS officials approved his request, and he could only be moved if there was an empty cell available. But there wasn't, and because it was a crucial part of their escape plan, they decided to abort the escape attempt. According to several witnesses, Bester received a late-night visitor on the 16th of April, but no official records of this visit exist. Bester cancelled his pending isolation request the next morning, and the body they'd kept on ice was thrown into a river where it would be discovered by passers-by on the 29th of April. The mortuary tag was still attached to its toe, and it would later enable the police to link the discarded body to Nandipa. Well, that was a terrible idea. You should have obviously got rid of that and made the body unrecognizable. Why would you not do that? Their second attempt was scheduled to take place in the early hours of Tuesday, the 3rd of May 2022. That Monday was a public holiday, and MCC was guarded by a skeleton staff. On the 23rd of April 2022, Nandipa walked into the National Hospital in Bloemfontein and told the officials working there that she wanted to claim a body. She'd told them that it belonged to the brother of a friend of hers, a Zimbabwean immigrant named Zando Moyo, and once again she had all the documentation she needed ready. She identified the body, signed the necessary paperwork, and then had the body transported to a local funeral home. Wow, you could just go into hospital and take a body, apparently. Just like they'd done the first time around, they held a small funeral late at night, but this time the coffin was weighed down by 3 10-kilo bags filled with cornmeal, aka coarsely ground dried maize meal, or millipap, as we know it. On the 27th of April, Nandipa's father, Zolila Sekulini, rented a bucky, aka a pickup truck or an Uzo, at the O.R. Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg. That same day, Bester once again applied to be moved to a single cell. 2 days later, the unit supervisor, Matsuhara, drove the bucky to MCC. On the back was a wooden television cabinet that was scheduled to be repaired in the prison skills development workshop, and they'd hidden the decoy body inside of it. What was in there? A wooden television. Jesus Christ, how big is that television? You fit a body in there? Once he arrived at the prison, Matsuhara was initially waved through the sally port because the guard on duty recognized him, but a supervisor insisted that, as per prison policy, the bucky had to be thoroughly searched before it could enter the premises since it was a private vehicle. According to the witnesses, the supervisor was called away by a control room operator before this order could be carried out, and Matsuhara parked the bucky in the inner complex at MCC. The cabinet was unloaded and was stored untouched in the workshop for the next year. Bruh. That cabinet, there's a dead body in there. That shit's gonna smell terrible. On the 30th of April, the inmate who was housed in cell 35 allegedly applied to be moved back to general population. His application was approved, and he was dragged kicking and screaming out of his cell, insisting that the wardens were going to have him killed. Later that day, Bester was moved into cell 35, and he jokingly told the other inmates that he wouldn't be staying there for very long. To ensure that he wouldn't be inconvenienced while he waited to be sprung from prison, the wardens even ensured that his cell phone, his laptop, and his other belongings were also moved to his new cell. This is so corrupt, Jesus Christ. On the 1st of May, Lipolo, the CCTV technician, wheeled a black dustbin containing the decoy body from the skills development workshop into the prison yard and was caught on camera sweeping the yard to avoid suspicion. He dragged the dustbin towards Broadway's emergency door and entered the building by swiping his access key, bypassing the usual security measures altogether, since as part of the control room staff he was allowed access. The cameras didn't record him entering the building since the emergency door was located in a known camera blind spot, and it is conveniently located across from cell 35. Lipolo then dragged the bin to the dark room, or the solitary confinement room, and left it there since the room was no longer in use. The next afternoon, Lipolo seemingly left work at 4:30 p.m., but instead of leaving the prison, he hid in the dark room. At 7:30 p.m., he slipped into the control room once the wardens had finished roll call and unplugged the DVR system for the CCTV cameras in Broadway. Leopoldo then dragged the dustbin into Bester's cell. One of the control room staff opened the cell door for him, and Bester helped him unload the body and place it on the floor. They poured petrol over the body, placed Bester's mattress on top of the body, and then doused it in petrol as well. After that, Leopoldo took his dustbin and hid away again. It's pretty clever. It's pretty elaborate, to be honest. At 2:15 a.m. on the 3rd of May, 2022, there's a loud explosion somewhere in Broadway, and a fire breaks out in cell 35. Matsuhara orders the other wardens to attend to a fight that had broken out somewhere else in the prison, while he reportedly walked up and down the smoke-filled halls in Broadway talking on his cell phone. Bester's cell door is opened, and Bester and Matsuhara light a petrol bomb in Bester's cell. They close the cell door behind them, and the two of them slip out of the building using an emergency exit. The second explosion is heard at around 3 a.m. Around this time, CCTV cameras outside the administrative building capture split-second footage of what is thought to be three figures running away from the building. By 4 a.m., Matsuhara ensures that the fire is put out using fire extinguishers and the cell is cordoned off. The fire is officially logged in the control room's logbook, and later G4S would report that the fire only broke out at 4 a.m. Around 5 a.m., the person whose charred remains are discovered in cell 35 is declared dead, and one of the inmates is ordered to clean the cell before the police arrive on the scene, possibly so that he could remove crucial evidence like the remains of the petrol bomb. The next day, the Department of Correctional Services would issue a media statement to explain that Thabo Bester had killed himself in his cell. Several investigations into his death were launched, but because no one suspected that it escaped, these investigations would drag on for months. And just like that, Thabo Bester was a free man. That's pretty nuts. Although, who would choose to kill themselves by hiding under a mattress, covering it in petrol, and setting it on fire? That sounds like the worst possible way to kill yourself. Blowing the whistle. Ground Up is a non-profit, human rights-focused news agency based in Cape Town, South Africa. According to their website, Ground Up started as a project between the Community Media Trust and the University of Cape Town's Centre for Social Science Research in April 2012 and became a standalone non-profit in June 2020. During an interview with Rebecca Davis, a senior journalist with Daily Maverick, journalist Daniel Stein explained that, quote, "We generally focus on stories of service delivery. We like to expose fraud and corruption, and mainly in areas that other investigative centres don't focus on." His colleague, Marcia Damons, explained that back in October 2022, their editor, Nathan Geffen, called her into her office one morning and told her that he had a prison story that he wanted her to cover, but that the details surrounding it were strictly confidential. Quoting her, "He basically asked me if I knew who the Facebook rapist was, and he told me that his name was Thabo Bester." Nathan told me that earlier that year, in May, a fire had broken out in Bester's cell, and he was assumed to have died by self-immolation. But Nathan had received a tip-off, leading him to believe that the investigation was dragging on, because at this stage, it had been about 5 or 6 months since the fire had broken out, and there was no public updates on what was happening. The whistleblower was Justice Edwin Cameron, a retired Constitutional Court judge and the head of the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services, or the JICS, which is responsible for overseeing conditions in prisons and the treatment of inmates. He told Nathan that the authorities had been aware that Thabo Bester had likely escaped from prison, and yet nothing was being done to find him. Marcia started her investigation into the story by requesting updates from all the relevant stakeholders and got her hands on all the publicly available documents relating to Bester's death. Quoting her, "For the first couple of articles, it was mainly just me trying to understand what exactly happened the night of the fire and where the authorities were with the investigation, but obviously we were not aware of the fact that the story would end up blowing up in the way that it did." Yeah, it's a hell of a story, isn't it? It's like a movie-style prison break. During the course of her inquiries, Marcia learned that following the fire on the morning of the 3rd of May 2022, the police were called and arrived at MCC at around 6:55 a.m. The forensics team was called in and they arrived at 10:30. The cell was processed, photographs were taken, and the body was moved to the state morgue in Bloemfontein. All of Bester's belongings were moved to the administrative building for safekeeping until his next of kin was able to come and collect them. The only contact on file was Bester's uncle, and he was called and told that Bester had passed away. Once the police gave the go-ahead, the cell was cleaned out and repainted, and a few days later, a new inmate would take Bester's place. On the 4th of May, an autopsy had been performed on the body that was found inside of cell 35. The pathologist, Dr. Jacobus Hendrik Fauché, found the victim's cause of death was blunt force trauma and that it had already been dead for several days before the fire broke out. Well, okay, so it's not the guy. They know this. Why are they Is it that why are they covering it up or not investigating it? That seems crazy. Dude broke out of prison. Without going into the specifics, the pathologist noted that the body had been refrigerated at some point and had already started to decompose before it ended up in the fire. Wasn't he left there for like a year? Didn't we say that? Furthermore, the body on his autopsy table measured 145 centimeters or 4'7" and weighed approximately 50.2 kilos, but prison records showed that Thabo Bester measured 1.7 meters or 5'5". It's worth noting that bodies can shrink if they're burnt, but the body wasn't so badly burnt that a height difference of 25 centimeters could be explained away as a result of the fire. Samples of his blood were sent away for testing and DNA analysis. Most notably, however, is that Dr. Fouché reported that the body smelled of paraffin. Meanwhile, staff working in the administrative building at MCC also reported that Bester's belongings smelled like petrol, and the operations director contacted the police to report that an accelerant had been used to start the fire. And since spontaneous combustion is not a thing, I just want to say, well, thank you, Captain Obvious. By this point, 3 different investigations were taking place at the same time. After Bester's death was reported to MCC management, MCC director Joseph Monyante tasked G4S audit and risk director Gert Bulleveld with investigating Bester's death and determining how they could prevent another similar incident from occurring again. Bulleveld and his team took statements from the guards who were on duty that day, reviewed the CCTV footage with the help of CCTV technician Thabo Lepolo, and checked the various logs and timesheets to find out what had happened that night. Bulleveld and his team found that on the night of the fire, the CCTV cameras for Broadway weren't recording, and as such, there wasn't any footage of what happened that night. They also found a statement made by unit supervisor Sanauha Matsuhara, which didn't match up with the events of that night, and that the cell locking mechanism had reportedly malfunctioned shortly before the fire was logged. Bulleveld and his team questioned Matsuhara, and when he was unable to provide them with a verifiable account of his movements that night, he was reported to HR. The 2 control room operators also faced disciplinary action, and all 3 men would be dismissed in June of 2022. Yeah, that's it. They essentially help with a prison break and they're just getting fired? I feel like you assist a prisoner get out of prison, surely you got to go to prison yourself. And it's probably not going to be a good time for you because you used to be a prison guard. As part of their investigation, Bulleveld and his team requested a copy of Bester's autopsy report on the 17th of May, but would later claim that the police had denied their request, resulting in them dropping their investigation into the cause of Bester's death and just ignoring the cause of it entirely. Instead, the police informed MCC management a week later that the investigation was now a murder investigation, and as such, they needed more information. On the 2nd of June, Bulleveld and his team provided the police with the information they had requested, as well as their findings so far. Meanwhile, JICS were doing their own investigation into how Thabo Bester had offed himself. They requested information from both MCC and the police, and they received reports from both parties, including whatever CCTV footage was available. It was JICS investigators who discovered the split-second footage of the 3 figures running away from the segregation unit building that night, suggesting that Bester had escaped. Following the news reports of Bester's death, Macy, Bester's mum, had contacted the police in order to lay claim to his body so that she could bury him. She was told that his body had been moved to Soweto, but was denied access because of the murder investigation. She was interviewed by a journalist, and because of this interview, the police were able to track her down in June 2022. They took a sample of her DNA, and on the 1st of July, the DNA analysis explained that Bester's DNA didn't match with the DNA of his biological mother. Well, I mean, obviously not. He wasn't the right size, but DNA is a good way to confirm it, isn't it? On the 3rd of August, MCC sent a copy of their preliminary report to JICS, and on the 10th of August, the police sent them copies of the autopsy report and the DNA analysis. Both reports indicated that it was likely that Thabo Bester was still alive. And then, on the 12th of October 2022, an inmate wrote a letter to the Free State High Court to report that one of the unit supervisors had helped Bester escape from prison, and a 4th investigation was launched. When the investigation report was published in December, it also confirmed that Bester hadn't died that night, and a copy of the report made it to Ground Up's reporters. On the 8th of November 2022, Ground Up published an article titled "Many Mysteries Surround the Death of Facebook Rapist Thabo Bester." It was followed on the 20th of January 2023 by an article titled "Murder at Mangaung Prison. Leaked report shows Facebook rapist was dead before a fire broke out in his cell." It was around then that Ground Up's editorial team realized that they might have bitten off more than they could chew. According to journalist Daniel Stein, when the story came across Nathan's desk, there was definitely the type of conversation where we said that crime is not our beat. Obviously, a sensational story like this is not our best, but I think that the main reason why we took it on was that it was clearly a massive failure by the investigative authorities in this case. Yeah, a dude escaped from prison and left behind a body that was completely different to his body, and you're still like, hey. The assumption and thinking was that just by asking questions and putting pressure on the authorities that they would come clean, and that it would pressure them to sufficiently disclose the truth and investigate properly. And it was by February 2023, so several months after Marcia had written her first article, and we realized that that was not going to happen, and that it was going to be our job as Ground Up to expose this, and we really doubled down on getting the story out as soon as possible. The two of them teamed up, and on the 15th of March, Ground Up published the article that would thrust Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandi into the spotlight. Did the Facebook rapist die in his cell, or did he escape from prison? Hell of a good title, isn't it? No wonder this got attention. Ground Up explained the basic facts of the case that had already been covered in their previous articles. They then explained the celebrity doctor Nandipa Magadamana had tried to collect the body just days after the fire, claiming to be Thabo Bester's wife. The next morning, a woman called Ground Up and told Daniel that she was pretty sure she'd spotted Bester at Woolworths in Sandton a month after his escape. FYI, here in South Africa, Woolworths is marketed as a high-quality grocery and apparel store. Basically, it's our equivalent of Waitrose in the UK. I've been to a Woolworths. Woolworths in the UK is it doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be kind of a crappy department store sort of thing. But Woolworths in South Africa is quite nice. I went to Cape Town a few years ago, and I remember where I was staying, the Airbnb was near a Woolworths, so I'd buy food there. It was nice. She explained that she'd been shopping at Woolworths on the 30th of June 2022 when she noticed Dr. Nandi shopping with her family. Her best friend adored Dr. Nandi, so the woman was already familiar with her. The woman low-key stalked Dr. Nandi and her family as they shopped and realized that the man dutifully following Dr. Nandi around wasn't her husband. He was well-built, had long black curly hair that he'd tied back, wore a khaki-colored hoodie, faded jeans and sunglasses, and looked nothing like the 52-year-old Dr. Mac. The woman snapped photos of the adulterous couple to send to her friend, then forgot about them until she read Ground Up's article about Dr. Nandi's possible involvement in Thabo Bester's escape. She provided Ground Up with copies of the photos, and they analysed the metadata to confirm her story. After comparing photos that had been taken of Bester during his court trials in 2011 to the photos she had provided, Marcia and Daniel knew that they now had the proof they needed to convince the public that Thabo Bester had indeed escaped from prison. On the 16th of March, they published an article titled, "Man Resembling Thabo Bester Spotted in Sandton Nearly 2 months After His Supposed Death from Prison Fire." And the story exploded. By the 24th of March, several media outlets were reporting on his escape, and by the end of March, every single news story covered another aspect of the saga. At first, the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Police, and the Department of Corrections all insisted that Bester had died in his cell that morning, but on the 25th of March, the Department of Corrections, or DCS, finally confirmed that Thabo Bester had indeed escaped from prison and that the department's track and trace team had been authorized to hunt them down. This came 3 days after Ground Up reported that another whistleblower had already reported Bester's possible escape to the department on the 11th of June 2022. The biggest question is, why aren't you doing something about this? Do you not care? I mean, I know it looks bad for you, but you have to... Someone's going to find out eventually. A rental estate agency called the local newspaper, the Sunday Times, and reported that Bester was renting a house worth 12 million rand in Hyde Park. And on the 24th of March, the media descended on the property, only to find that Nandipa and Bester had already fled the house. Quoting, "On the 21st of March, at around 9 a.m, a staff member calls in a panic to say there are armed people at the gate busy breaking in. These thugs, I call them thugs because they were armed to the hilt, wearing bulletproof vests, and they came in driving Mercedes with blue lights on. They were just there to escort the removal vans, which came to take away all their stuff. But once the furniture was removed, they stayed stripping the interiors, taking the stove and other furnishings. You could see they left in a hurry because of the way the cupboards were left, all the clothes all over the place, so it looked like they packed and left." According to the estate agency that leased the property to them, Nandipa had champagne taste and had been paying a staggering 65,000 rand or $3,400 per month for the house that she was renting. She was also renting another property next door and was in the process of converting it into a clinic so that she could move her practice there. But in the months following Bester's escape, Nandipa had quickly been running out of money, and work on the half-finished clinic had stopped earlier that year. The media took photos of the disarray inside the house, as well as the remains of the documents, cell phones, and other items that had been hastily burned in the backyard. Oh, you burning those documents. On the 4th of April, the media reported that the police had finally decided to investigate the Hyde Park mansion, claiming that they were looking for a Zimbabwean immigrant named Zando Moyo, the couple's gardener, since he hadn't been seen since Nandipa and Bester had fled the property. It was suspected that they might have killed him, so a forensics team was sent to gather whatever evidence they could. However, at that point, the house had already been thoroughly cleaned out and was again on the market, and the police were heavily mocked for being so late to the party. Overall, the police were tight-lipped over their investigation into where Bester and Nandipa had fled to, but an anonymous source told City Press that, quote, "We have police officers stationed at the Lesotho, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Eswatini border posts who've been instructed to be on the lookout, as we suspect the couple could be heading to another country. The search has been ongoing for a long time now, and we think that they may have already left South Africa or are on their way out." Interpol issued a red notice, informing international authorities that Bester was an escaped convict, and on the 7th of April 2023, the Justice and Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola issued a media briefing explaining that, quote, "The Minister of Police and the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services can confirm that escapee Mr. Thabo Bester, with his accomplice Dr. Nandipa Magaduma, along with a Mozambican national, have been arrested in Tanzania late last night." It's crazy that this dude breaks out of prison successfully and then it's like, yeah, I'm going to hang around in this country. Bro, if you escape from prison, you've got to leave. You've got to go to Lebanon or like a country that doesn't have extradition with South Africa, because otherwise you're fucked. Like, eventually they will come for you. You've got to leave. You don't have a choice. According to Fidelity, a private security company that is owned by G4S, they had been working closely with the DCS's track and trace team to track Bester down and had offered a reward of 100,000 rand to anyone who could provide them with the information that would lead to Bester's arrest. They'd been tipped off by multiple people that Bester and Nandipa had been driving a black Mercedes-Benz, which enabled the authorities to track them north through Zimbabwe and into Tanzania using CCTV footage. While the couple was staying at a hotel in Arusha, quote, "They were spotted by people working with South African authorities. They were driving a black SUV and were followed from a hotel while heading to the border of Kenya. In their possession were several fake passports." You got a fake passport and you haven't fled the country? What's up? And according to the Minister of Police, Becky Sile, none of them were stamped, suggesting that they'd been crossing borders illegally, possibly assisted by the Mozambican national and the stacks of cash that they still had in their possession. Yeah, that's... What? Why are you not in a non-extradition country? Why? Like, what's going on? Like, just leave and never cross a border. Like, Interpol won't get you unless you cross a border, and you've got to go to a country where they're just not interested in you. And I guess the reason you can't cross a border with a fake passport, because the fake passports are probably not that good. They're the sort of thing that would stand up to scrutiny, like, I don't know, if you're opening a Blockbuster account or something. But if you cross a border, I don't know, whatever that machine they scan it in, and then they look at stuff on the computer. That's not just for show. They're definitely looking you up. The Tanzanian police contacted the South African authorities, who provided them with the information they needed to confirm Bester and Nandipa's identities, and then a team flew to Tanzania to start the process of bringing the notorious couple back to South Africa. Back home, the public had mixed feelings about what had become known as the Bester saga. I'd already written a short about it and emailed Simon to pitch this script to him. I think that's why I had the vibes at the beginning that this dude set a body on fire. Like, I didn't want to spoil it for everyone, but at the beginning I was kind of like, this dude's still in prison. This dude escaped from prison. That's not his body. And I think now I know why, because I remember it from this short. My family were discussing the various news articles on Bester's arrest around candlelit dinners, thanks to a particularly bad wave of load shedding, and various commenters asked questions like, why all the focus on this criminal? The headlines should be what the Minister of Electricity is doing to get the country out of stage 6 blackouts. There's a lot more to this that we'll probably never get to the bottom of. It would not surprise me if there was a senior ANC member involved. ANC is like the big South African political party, right? The corruption is immense. I'm confused. Apparently, there were suspicions about his escape at the time, reports were issued about the anomalous autopsy results, among others, yet nothing seems to have been done by the various authorities until the ground-up expose. It must have been a coordinated cover-up with the blessing and support of some very senior management, or am I missing something? Yeah, that's that last one there, the one about being confused. I am also confused. How did they not look for him? And they weren't the only ones demanding answers. Passing the buck. Now, usually, this is the section where we delve into the court case surrounding the story that we're covering today. However, since the majority of the court cases are still ongoing, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to take a look at the 2-day parliamentary briefing into Bester's escape that took place on the 12th and 13th of April 2023. At the time of recording, that's basically a year ago. So this is all very, very recent for Casual Criminalist. The briefing was hosted by the Parliamentary Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, and representatives from G4S, JICS, Integratron, and DCS were all asked to attend. They all presented their case to members of Parliament and were then subjected to up to 4 hours worth of questions by these MPs. One of these MPs was Glynis Breitenbach, an ex-national prosecutor whose hard-hitting questions made her Twitter famous and whose statements were most quote-worthy. Over the course of those 2 days, anyone with half a brain could see that in the year following Bester's escape, the investigations into the fire in Cell 35 had become so mired in bureaucratic red tape that it had been a shitstorm waiting to burst. Judge Edwin Cameron, the investigative judge at JICS, opened his presentation by admitting that he was the person who told Groundup to investigate Bester's escape. He also told the committee that at first no one wanted to believe that Bester had escaped, which made them overly cautious during their investigations. We now know much more about what happened, but it wasn't clear in the beginning, even as the facts started to come before us, even as we got to that post-mortem report, it seemed beyond credibility that there was a faked scene and an escape. Cobus Groenwood, the regional commercial director of G4S Africa, led G4S's presentation and explained that they'd always been under the impression that Bester had killed himself. After all, the police never indicated that Bester hadn't died that day. G4S tried to pass the buck, allegedly. Wait, what's this called? Yeah, this title is called Passing the Buck. It's like everyone's like, no, it wasn't my fault, it was the police. No, it wasn't my fault, it was the prison. It wasn't my fault, it was G4S. He then went on to explain that G4S's only goal was to figure out where the holes in their system were, so a compliance audit was ordered. Within a month, they'd identified several of the people who'd later be arrested by the police for their involvement in Bester's escape and had dismissed 3 of them. They upgraded their security systems, fixed the holes in their controls, and moved on with their lives, trusting in the ever-competent police to find out how Thabo Bester had managed to kill himself. After all, since the prison opened back in 2001, they'd only had 3 escapes, all of which happened away from prison grounds. Bester's escape was a rare phenomenon. I feel like there should be no escapes from prison. That should be your goal. It's like, no, we're doing great. These 3 people have escaped. It's like, how about that's not doing well? G4S's management team seemingly didn't raise any concerns regarding how the cell had caught fire. They didn't try to find out who might have wanted to kill Bester or how they'd managed to murder someone in their custody. Oh yeah, this does. I'm always like, I was told it was a suicide thing. So I'm like, yeah, it's a suicide, but this does seem more like a murder, doesn't it? Because it's like a brutal way to die. They didn't try to find out what had motivated at least 3 of their employees to shirk their duties that night, and when multiple inmates from Broadway emailed prison management from their illegal cell phones and tried to report that Bester had escaped, they were told to use proper channels of communication and mail them a letter. Instead, are you shitting me? G4S would claim they'd fully cooperated with all the stakeholders involved, which included the police, JICS, Department of Corrections, but all of them would complain that getting information out of G4S was like squeezing water from a stone, and that when they visited MCC to talk to witnesses or some of the wardens who'd been on duty that night, they either didn't cooperate with them or had been transferred to a different prison. Judge Cameron would later tell the committee that the police had already told both JICS and G4S that Bester had likely escaped back in August 2022. In fact, Judge Cameron had personally informed the director of G4S in November 2022 that Bester had escaped that night. They just chose to turn a blind eye to the facts. According to Judge Cameron, what happened that night wasn't a rare phenomenon. It wasn't a rare incident. It was the culmination of a process of degradation and rottenness. The police commissioner, on the other hand, explained that they'd known that something was fishy from the moment they'd entered Bester's cell. They opened an inquest into Bester's apparent demise, and when the autopsy report arrived on the 6th of May, 3 days after Bester's escape, they suspected that they were now dealing with a murder. However, the day before, Nandipa had arrived at the morgue in Bloemfontein to lay claim to Bester's body. She told officials that Bester was a customary law husband, aka they're married by way of a traditional African wedding and their marriage isn't necessarily registered with the Department of Home Affairs, and requested that his body should be moved to Soweto so that she could arrange for his body to be cremated. Sounds like an excellent way to make that body that is clearly not him disappear. Constable Lagoa, a member of the investigation team stationed in Bloemfontein, was the one who noticed that Nandipa had already laid claim to 2 other bodies within the span of a month and reported it to his supervisor, Brigadier Shuai. Yeah, this is mad suspicious. Like, you're claiming multiple bodies? Like, what the fuck? You gotta get on some list. Brigadier Shuai then called the morgue in Soweto and told them that no one was to remove Bester's body from the morgue, which led to Nandipa filing an application with the High Court in Pretoria asking for Bester's body to be released to her immediately. Brigadier Shuai then contacted the state's attorney, who ensured that Nandipa's application was denied and that vital evidence, aka the decoy body, didn't go missing. Yeah, because she's literally trying to burn the evidence, and that should not be happening. But this is where the investigation took a wrong turn. You see, during their presentation, the police explained that from the beginning, their investigative efforts were assisted by the National Prosecuting Agency, or the NPA. They were literally running all over the country looking for witnesses and interviewing people, and every time that they presented their case to the NPA, they were told that they still didn't have enough evidence to warrant an arrest warrant, and they had to dig deeper. The problem is, the higher-ups were no longer focused on investigating Bester's death or apparent escape. They were convinced that Nandipa was dealing in illegal body parts and that they just stumbled onto a major criminal organization. Okay. No, he just escaped from prison and they used the body, guys. It's right there in front of you. They were convinced that Nandipa was just a small fish and that they had to wait for the big fish to show their faces before they could arrest her. And yet no one kept an eye on her movements in the months following Bester's so-called death. What? If you genuinely believe that you're tracking some major criminal organization that's selling body parts for some reason, then maybe keep your eyes on her. This is all very incompetent, isn't it? And corrupt. Also, that they wouldn't jeopardize their highly confidential investigation by alerting Nandipa and her cronies that they were onto them. Meanwhile, Macy had provided the police with her DNA, and when the DNA didn't match the DNA of the decoy body, her DNA was matched to others on the system, and it came to light that the police didn't have a record of Bester's DNA on file. The commissioner explained that because Bester had pled guilty during a sexual assault trial, his DNA was never compared to the DNA that had been found in his victims' bodies, so it was never loaded into the system, and the original samples were destroyed. Instead, the police had to find other members of Thabo Bester's family who were able to confirm that Macy was his mother. Only then were they able to deduce that Thabo Bester was probably still alive, and on the 10th of August 2022, they presented their findings to the JICS. By July, multiple people had already blown the whistle and informed JICS representatives that Bester had escaped that night. Some of them were wardens who worked at the prison, and some of them were inmates in Broadway, all of whom were transferred to new prisons to keep them safe. Judge Edwin Cameron, meanwhile, was growing increasingly insistent that they had to warn the public of Bester's escape, and he called Minister Ronald Lamola, the Minister of Justice, on the 26th of October to warn him that Bester may have escaped. The minister then called the National Commissioner, who explained that the situation was, quote, broader than just an escape. There are multiple bodies, there's a suspicion of a scheme, there's a huge network that is being investigated that might be alerted with any process that might jeopardize the investigation. The minister claims that he did ask the National Commissioner to prioritize the case, and that whenever he followed up on the case, he was told that the investigation was still ongoing. The Department of Corrections, meanwhile, was busy with their own investigation. It seems that they were mostly focused on G4S's management of the prison and how it differed from how DCS managed their prisons. They also suspected, early on, that Thabo Bester had escaped, and yet nothing was done. In the meantime, the police were waiting on DCS to do a head count of the inmates at MCC and confirm that Bester wasn't somehow hiding in another cell before they could file the necessary paperwork and officially start investigating his escape, which was only done on the 16th of January 2023. That meant that by October 2022, 6 months after Bester had escaped, the Minister of Justice, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Department of Corrections, G4S, and the police had known that Thabo Bester had escaped. Yet they all waited until March of 2023 when the reports on the matter were finalized before they did anything about it, by which point the people of South Africa already wanted to know why the f*** no one had warned them that a serial rapist and killer was once again free. It's insane. And also, those early months, you gotta go get him. You gotta be fast, because otherwise, I mean, if he wasn't an idiot, he'd be in Lebanon already. When the committee asked the police commissioner and the head of the Department of Corrections why it had taken them so long to warn Bester's victims and the public that Bester had escaped, they both offered the same excuse. G4S had hindered their investigation because they'd insisted that Bester had died that day. G4S insisted that they complied with all of the requirements stipulated in their contracts with DCS, and Minister Lamola apologized to the people of South Africa for not warning them of Bester's escape sooner, all the while insisting that he'd done everything that was required of him at the time. Minister Becky Seeley, our idiotic Minister of Police, also offered his apologies, all while explaining that they had to prioritize their investigation into their make-believe body part smuggling ring. What is the motivation for body part smuggling? Why? What's the reason? In response to that, MP Glynis Breitenbach would say that, quote, "While you were so busy protecting the secrecy of your investigation, if Bester had murdered another woman, had attacked another woman, what would you have said then? Clearly, there were sexual assault survivors out there trying to live their lives and hoping not to run into Bester while out shopping for groceries, but nothing was done to support those people, warn them, and protect them. It's an absolute disgrace that the victims of this man were not warned, were not prepared, were not protected. It's an absolute disgrace, and you should hang your head in shame, all of you. Yes, you're goddamn right." The chairperson of the committee closed the parliamentary briefing by explaining that it had been a necessary process and that the committee would draw up a list of recommendations for the parties involved to implement. How about one of the recommendations? Get the guy, once he escapes from prison, faster. One of the recommendations was that the Department of Corrections had to end its contract with G4S and take full control of the correctional centre following the dismissal of the Director of Contract Management, the Controller, and the Deputy Controller. Most South Africans were mollified by this show of parliamentary power and went on to complain about Stage 6 load shedding instead. But there was one question that most South Africans needed an answer to. Who did the body in Cell 35 belong to? Isn't it just going to be a random body? Like, didn't she steal it from a morgue? The forgotten victim. On the 22nd of April, 2023, we got our answer when multiple newspapers reported that the body in Cell 35 had been identified. It had been the 32-year-old Katlego Mafolo, an unemployed father of two from Bloemfontein. He was born in 1990, was raised by his grandmother and his aunt. His mother was working in Johannesburg at the time, and he met his father, Balfo, for the first time when he was a teenager. He grew up poor, but liked to play soccer, and proudly supported his local soccer team, the Bloemfontein Celtics. He used to work as a waiter at various fast food restaurants, but struggled to keep a job. According to his aunt, quote, "He really loved his children. It hurt him that he couldn't support them financially, but he had so much love for them." According to his cousin, Katlego's dream was to become a celebrity, to be in the media, to be known. He's not been killed by any of our characters in today's episode, though. He's just died some other way. Katlego went missing sometime around April 2022. He disappeared from social media, which alerted his father that something was wrong. Batho then travelled to Bloemfontein to look for his son, and the family only reported him missing in mid-May. According to the police, Katlego had collapsed in town one day and was taken to the National Hospital. There, the staff did what they could, but he passed away later that night due to a severe brain injury. Later, his cause of death would be in question, but once the news of Bester's escape broke, his autopsy would reveal that he'd suffered blunt force trauma to the front of his head, suggesting that he'd been attacked. His missing persons report would later be compared to the forms Nandipa had completed when she'd claimed the body from the National Hospital's morgue and enabled the police to finally identify him. They asked for samples of his mother's DNA to confirm this, and according to Bartho, at that time, police did not tell us the DNA was for testing the body found in Thabo Bester's cell. It was only when we got the results that it was discovered that the body is Katlego's. It has been speculated that Katlego had been targeted specifically, and at first, everyone involved in Bester's escape was charged with murder. No, he's just a random body, unfortunately, who was attacked, but that's a different investigation. However, since the National Prosecuting Authority wasn't able to prove that he'd been murdered, the charges were withdrawn. Of course, now Katlego's family has a vested interest in seeing Bester, Nandipa, and their accomplices appear in court so they can account for the heartbreak they'd inflicted on Katlego's family. The Bester Saga. Over the last year, Bester, Nandipa, and their co-accused appeared in court on multiple occasions for their bail hearings, most of which were approved. The charge sheet listed 12 people in total, and 9 of them have been charged with multiple crimes. The charges against 3 of them have been dropped completely by December 2023. Thabo Bester was charged with fraud, violation of a body, corruption, arson, defeating the ends of justice, and of course, escaping from prison. He made headlines when he appeared in court wearing clothes worth tens of thousands of rand and claimed that he wasn't Bester since the Department of Home Affairs couldn't prove that such a person existed. The judge laughed at his claims, pointed to him and said, "There is a person in the accused box that happens to be Thabo Bester," effectively dismissing Bester's claims. The Department of Home Affairs would later confirm that with the help of Macy, they'd been able to assign Bester his own ID number, and he was issued with his very first legal ID. Since he still has to serve his prison sentence, he was sent back to prison and is currently being held at Kugosi Mampuru 2 Management Area, a maximum security prison in Pretoria, the same one where Rosemary Ndlovu is currently being kept. Ah yes, we've done a video on that monster previously. Nandipa was charged with fraud, violation of a body, corruption, arson, assisting an escape from prison, harboring and concealing an escaped offender, and defeating the end of justice. Initially, she appeared in prison wearing a hood and mask in shame for her actions, but she has since dropped the act and made news headlines for openly flirting and holding hands with Bester while they attended trial. Despite their canoodling, as one journalist put it, she has claimed that Bester had kidnapped her before they fled to Tanzania, and then claimed that her extradition from Tanzania was unlawful. This has since been disproven, and she's currently being held at Johannesburg prison. She's the big surprise of today's episode. I was like, wow, this person's doing great. And then it's like, what have you done to your life? Their other co-accused faced similar charges and included Nandipa's father, whose involvement shocked everyone familiar with him. He'd also gone into hiding after the news broke that Nandipa had likely helped Bester escape from prison, though his involvement only seems to be that it hired the bucky that was used to transfer the body, as well as Nandipa claiming that the first body she'd claimed belonged to him. Senoha Matsuhara, the unit supervisor, who so blatantly failed to perform his duties that night, also appeared in court. Despite being promised 7 million rand in exchange for helping Bester escape, he'd only received 85,000 rand, or 4,500 American dollars, and had used the money to put down a deposit and take out a loan on a brand new Volkswagen T-Roc, which was worth about 650,000 rand. The monthly payment on the T-Roc is 9,500 rand, and since Matsura was only earning between 15 and 18,000 a month at the time, this drew the attention of his colleagues, who'd later informed the police of this extravagant purchase. Yeah, it's like if you're a cop in a low-paying job and stuff like that, and you suddenly start having money, that's mad suspicious. You got to come up with a good story, like your rich uncle died or something. Taboho Lepolo, the CCTV technician who'd switched the cameras off that night, had handed himself over to the police once the news broke that Bester had been caught, claiming that he was fearing for his life. He'd later explained that he'd only received 40,000 rand for his role in Bester's escape and basically confessed all during his time in court. The 2 Central Control Room officers who'd been on duty that night had also been arrested, but one of them would later be acquitted of all charges. 4 G4S prison wardens were also implicated, but since charges against 2 of them had since been dropped, I'm not going to mention them here. Zandamoyo, Nandipa's gardener, was also implicated in the escape. He'd also gone into hiding shortly after the news of Bester's escape broke, and his disappearance had sparked the search of the Hyde Park mansion. According to ENCA, he knew that Bester was an escaped convict and had been handsomely reimbursed in return for keeping his secret. From what I've read, the investigation against Bester is still ongoing, and Nandipa's trial is set to begin in February of this year. Well, that's about now, actually, in Bloemfontein's High Court, and one of the questions that the public still wants answers to is, why did a beautiful, wealthy, intelligent woman like that get involved with a piece of scum like Bester? It's a fantastic and mysterious question. I think he's just mega charming. We've already discussed the phenomenon of hybristophilia, or Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, on this channel, but most of those cases involve serial killers who won't ever leave prison, and most of those women end their relationships with their soulmates once they actually spend some time with them. One example is from our episode on the Casanova killer, in which Paul John Knowles went to live with his fiancée, Angela Kovic, after he was paroled from prison. Angela soon realized that Knowles wasn't quite the charismatic romantic hero that she thought he was, and she dumped his ass. But there are some women who fall for a killer and then break all of the moral codes to please them. One of these is Victoria Compton, who we discussed in our episode titled The Real Life Harley Quinn. She'd fallen in love with Kenneth Bianchi, one of 2 serial killers who would collectively become known as the Hillside Strangler, and at his request had strangled a woman named Kim Breed to death. Another example is Carla Homolka, who we covered in our episode Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, the Ken and Barbie Killers. Today, together with her husband Paul, they'd sexually assault over 20 women and kill at least 3. Paul had emotionally and physically abused Carla for the entirety of their relationship, and Carla only turned on him after she'd ended up in hospital as a result of one of those beatings. Forensic psychiatrist Graham Glancy would explain that she was a classic example of Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, and where Paul scored 35 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, Carla only scored 5. Now, compared to these 2 women, I think it's fair to say that Nandipa was indeed the Bonnie to Bester's Clyde. I think that at first, Nandipa was motivated by greed. She achieved her celebrity status and lavish lifestyle by marrying her much older husband, and when he could no longer provide her with what she needed, Bester stepped in to fill that void and promised her wealth beyond her wildest dreams. Just like Veronica, Nandeepa committed most of her crimes while Bester was still in prison and lavished in the millions of rands that she was raking in, spending it on expensive cars and luxurious holidays and decorating her Hyde Park mansion. Once he was released, however, they lived together like an ordinary everyday couple, and maybe Nandeepa thought that she could change him. But by that point, they were quickly running out of money, which would have put a severe strain on their relationship. I think Bester would have continued to pressure Nandeepa into taking part in bigger, more elaborate crimes, but she was already struggling to keep up the appearance that nothing was wrong. But I don't think their relationship would have lasted much longer. As soon as she stopped being useful to him, Bester would have cut her loose as well, leaving her to face the ruin of what her life had become, if he let her live, that is. During an interview with journalists Marcia Damons and Daniel Stein, forensic investigative psychologist Dr. Gerhard Labusachny explained that, "I think everybody's a means to an end for him. I don't really think he cares about anybody. You're only on his radar for as long as you have some benefit to him. If you don't have benefits anymore, you're out. I'm not saying he's going to kill you, but you serve no purpose. He doesn't care what happens to you." Sounds like pretty psychopathic, doesn't it? So maybe going to prison is the best possible ending that Dr. Nandi could have asked for. We'll just have to wait and see if South Africa's legal system feels the same way. And now for some dismembered appendices. Number 1. Early in May 2023, the Department of Corrections announced that they were ending their contract with BCC. BCC had 90 days to prepare before they had to hand the prison over to the DCS, or alternatively, they could attend a mediation session where both parties could decide how they were going to move forward. The mediation session failed and the matter had to be taken to court. For now, Mangaung Correctional Center is managed by the Department of Corrections, but as far as I know, we're still paying G4S millions of rands in taxpayer money until their contract term runs out in 2026. I feel like this is allegedly, in my opinion. I don't know what the contract says, but letting someone escape and then doing nothing about it, allegedly, is kind of like, I feel like maybe the contract should be ended a little bit early, maybe, my opinion, not legal. Number 2, the Koch family kept in contact with Bester throughout the 10 years he spent in prison. They visited him, attended family days and other prison-sponsored get-togethers, and all the while he'd keep trying to get them to give him money, reportedly claiming that he was diabetic and needed money for better, healthier food. Classic con man continues the con. And even when people know they're being conned, they're somehow taken in by him. It's quite impressive, really. Number 3, in September 2023, Marcia Damons and Daniel Stein received the prestigious Nat Nakasa Award for Media Integrity for their work on the Thabo Bester story. The award is our version of the US's Pulitzer Prize. Number 4, before the release of the book, The Thabo Bester Story, both Bester and Nandeepa tried to stop its publication, claiming that they hadn't approved of its contents. Obviously, their attempts didn't work, and if you want to piss them off even more, why not buy it on Amazon? Number 5. Despite numerous requests, neither Netflix nor the local streaming service Showmax has agreed to do a show on Thabo Bester's prison escape yet. But according to Showmax's CEO, filmmakers are more than welcome to submit their pitches. The escape is very movie-like. Number 6. According to the Department of Home Affairs, there are actually 3 Thabo Besters still alive. One had immigrated to the US years ago, but was still pestered by internet idiots who want to know if he was the Thabo Bester. The other Thabo grew up not far from the infamous Bester, and when news broke that there was a warrant out for his arrest, Thabo showed up at his local police station and told the police that he was not the droid that they were looking for. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. Why not leave the show a review on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts? And yeah, that's it. I'll see you next time.